Today's daf we're going to be learning is Avodah Zarah daf Lamed Het. We're going to get started. We'll go just review very quickly the Mishnah Lamed He Amud Bet because that's going to be the topics that we're going to deal with today. We have the end of the Mishnah, which are referring to cases from Gentiles where the following items are forbidden, but you are allowed to have Isur Hana'ah. In other words, you can benefit from them, you just can't eat them. So what are these? Tarit Trufa, this is a chopped up fish that we're worried that maybe non-kosher fish are chopped up in it. Tzir she'en badagat kilbit shotetet bo, you have a brine that doesn't have the kilbit fish floating in it, so then it's not clear it comes from a kosher fish. Hachilik, which we'll talk about soon, or immediately almost. Quart shel chiltit, also that. Melech sal kondit. Hare elu asurim. Okay, so these are the things we're going to get to today. So, tarit trufa v'tzir she'en badagat, starting at the second line on our daf. My chilek. Amar Rav Nachman bar Abba Amar Rav zo sultanit. Okay, that doesn't really help us. What is sultanit? So the Koran has a footnote. The Koran is very good when it comes to whether it's botany or whether it's animals or creatures or a fish or that kind of thing about defining what they are. But just so you know, even the Koran comments that, we're not exactly sure what all these things are, but perhaps the sultanit, they say, is a type of sardine. Okay, Amar Rav Nachman Amar Rav Nachman, so that's a sultanit. So why is this forbidden from a Gentile? Mipnei she'ervona oleima. Okay, what's ervona oleima? Well, and by the way, this sultanit that we're going to talk about, that maybe is a type of sardine, it's the kind of thing that doesn't have scales when it's in the water, but later it develops. It doesn't have scales. Right, it's a small fish that it's usually caught before it develops scales, and then it develops scales after. And why is it prohibited? Well, the concern is it's very small, and it often gets caught together with non-kosher fish. And therefore, there's a concern that the fish might be mixed up with other non-kosher fish. Particularly if it's from Gentiles, right? They won't be careful about it. Tanu Rabbanan, because they're small, you won't necessarily notice the difference. Tanu Rabbanan. Ein lo achshav. Now we're getting into... Okay, just to be clear, there's laws of kashrut. That's not what we're talking about, but the Braita we're going to quote right now is talking about kashrut, and then there's laws of what we can have from Gentiles because of the concern that maybe they mixed other things in. So now we're going to learn, obviously this sultanit is kosher, it's just that you can't have it from Gentiles. We must be talking, I assume, in these cases of like a pickled fish. In other words, if it's salted by a Gentile and ready to eat. So Tanu Rabbanan, ein lo achshav ati legadel la'achar zman, kegon hasultanit v'hapitz, harei ze mutar. Okay, fish that don't have scales in the beginning, but they will develop further on, like the sultanit and like the apitz. Okay, the apitz, according to the, they say it's a general term for small species of fish, which develop scales later on. Harei ze mutar. Yesh lo achshav ati la'ashir b'zman sholem min hayam, but if it has and fit scales while it's in the water, and then it's later going to shed them when it gets out of the water. Kigon akunus va'afunas, kitas patayis, ve'achs patayis, ve'otanus. Okay, what all these things are a good question. So the Koran gives us a few of them. The akunus, they say, is the Atlantic chub mackerel. Kitas patayis is known as a type of swordfish. Otanus is a tuna fish. Okay, so they don't give you all of them, but they give you a few of them. Mutal. Okay, all these fish are kosher because they don't have scales when they get out, right, later, but they shed their scales, but they do have scales originally, and that's also sufficient. So if it will have scales later, or it will shed its scales, either which way it has scales, that's fine. Achwas Rabbi Yavau b'Kesri. So he made an announcement in Kesri and taught the following thing. Kirbei dagim v'ubaran. Okay, the insides of the fish, which they would use like a sort of liquid, they were like a fat that they would put on things. Vit ubaran, and the eggs from a fish. Nikachim mikol adam, you can take from any person and not worry that it comes from non-kosher fish. Chezkatan enam ba'in ela mipalusa v'aspamia. This is very interesting. So Rabbi Yaval and Kesari said that the fish that they get from Caesarea are the fish that come from abroad. They either come from Pelusa, which is from Egypt, or from, again, I'm going by the Koran's explanation, or Aspamia, which could be Spain. Okay, or it could be some Roman provinces in the Spain area, which come across the Mediterranean, and there's only kosher fish. So therefore, you don't have to worry about it. Ki hada amar Abaye, just like Abaye said, Hai tzachanta de bav nahara, the tzachanta fish that you get in the river, the river of Bav. Sharia is permitted. My time. What's the reason? Ilema. Now, what's the reason why there's only kosher fish here? If you want to say Mishum Duridifa Maya, because the water streams very fast, the Haidag Tamei Kevan Deletli Chut Hashidra, and non-kosher fish don't have a spinal cord. So because of that, Beduchte Duridifa Maya Lo Matzekai, maybe they can't survive in very fast-moving waters, and that's why in the river Bav, there were no non-kosher fish. But that can't be, because Hakachazin and Dekai, we see that there are fish that survive in, kosher fish that survive in very fast-streaming waters. Elamishim de Malichai Maya, maybe because the water's salty, and it can't survive in salty water. V'haidag Tamei, Kevan Deletli Kalpe Beduchta, de Malichai Maya Lo Matzekai. Since the non-kosher fish don't have scales, perhaps they can survive in salted waters. But they say no, because v'hadag tamei kevan deletli lo matzekai v'hakachazina dekai. But we see they survive. Fish with scales, without scales, survive even in salty waters. So it's not for that reason. It's not for that reason. Ela mishum de lo merabetina dag tamei. It's because the tina, the soil that's in the bottom of the water, okay, it doesn't allow the non-kosher fish to reproduce. Okay, it doesn't have the right environment for that to happen. Amaravina, ha'igna, but now going back to this river Bav, where they said there's only kosher fish, and therefore any fish, the innards of the fish that come from there, or right where you don't see the fish itself. Okay, or what else did we say? The ubaran, the fish eggs, where you can't really see what they are at this point. So you don't have to worry about it. But comes Ravina and he says, Ha'idna, but nowadays, the kashavche bein nahar goza, the nahar gamda, asire. But now these two other rivers dump into it, and there they have non-kosher fish, and therefore now you have to worry that there's non-kosher fish, and this law is no longer applicable. It's fascinating to see how things changed, right? When environmental issues change, how it changes the laws of kashrut. Amrabai, Hai Chamra Diyama, the donkey of the sea, and Shari is permitted, and Torah Diyama Asr, but the ox of the sea is forbidden. Okay, so now we're going to explain how you remember this. V'simanech tamei tahol tamei. The way you remember this is what they call the donkey, right? The water donkey. They actually have also in the Koran an explanation of what these are, or potentially. The Chamra Diyama, the sea donkey, is it's used to refer to the Atlantic cod, and the Torah Diyama is possibly a type of ray fish. Okay, so what's ironic here, and that's how you're going to remember which, is that the kosher animal, the shore, the one in the sea, is not kosher, and the non-kosher animal, the donkey, actually is kosher. This is what's called the sea donkey. Okay, so there you have, and again, they're just going through lists of which fish are kosher, which ones are not. Again, this doesn't have to do with akum and all that. We started with akum. From here, we're going on a big tangent. Amar Rav Ashi, shvar nuna share, kadesh nuna asur. Okay, so shafar nuna, this type of fish, is permitted, and the kadesh nuna is not permitted. V'simanech, how do you remember this? Kodesh la'Hashem. The kodesh one is not kosher because it's la'Hashem. It's safe for God. We can't eat it. Ika da amri. Some people say cover nuna asur. It's not kadesh nuna that's asur. It's cover nuna. Now, how do you remember this? Simanech kivrei avdei kochavim. The way you remember this is the graves of avdei kochavim. Now, some people say the graves of avdei kochavim, what it means is they're not mitame, they don't make you impure, so that's how you remember it's kosher. The problem is that graves of Gentiles do make you impure, but perhaps they make you impure in a different way than with Jews. Too much oil perhaps isn't. Anyway, that's one way of reading it, or maybe they're just saying kvarim, the kever is for the Gentiles, meaning it's forbidden to us and you can't eat it. Rabbi Akiva, right, sorry, did I say before the cover nun is asur? Right, sorry. Kivrei avdei kochavim are forbidden, right? They're matame. The issue is they're not matame like Jewish graves in a different way. Anyway, that's a bit of a question asked by some of the commentaries, but I think it more likely is just saying the kever, just like the other one was for Hashem, not for us. It's for Gentiles and not for us. Rabbi Akiva. Now we're going to have three cases where rabbis came to a certain area. They brought him a fish that I guess he wasn't used to it, and they brought it because he wasn't from that area. They brought him a fish that looked like a chipusha, which is a non-kosher fish. So now how did he figure out whether it was kosher or not? He couldn't see the scales on it. He put it in a basket, and then then he saw, right, now some people say maybe took off, right, like scraped it off and then saw that there were scales, or perhaps as it soaked in this dish, it then started shedding its scales. Somehow he saw there were scales and he permitted it. Rav Ashi ikla litam dolia, also a place. Aitu l'kamea hununas. Aitu l'kamea hununa. They brought again a type of fish. Davidami litzlufchai, looked like an eel, which is a non-kosher fish. Nakte lahadayomi, he brought it into the sunlight. And chazi dahava beit simchai, but he saw it had scales. V'sharye, and he permitted it. So these two cases where they saw a fish, it looked non-kosher, but then when they looked more closely, they figured out it had scales on it. So there were different tactics. One putting it in a basket, one putting it to the sunlight. Rav Ashi again, iklalahu atra, he came to a place. Aita l'kamei nuna, davidame l'shafrunina. Now the shafrunina is actually a kosher fish. Chafye, but he wasn't sure because he'd never seen the fish before. So what did he do to make sure? Chafye b'mishkale chivre, he covered it with a white vessel. Chaza b'kalfe v'sharye, and then because it had dark skin, the dark scales were noticeable in the white vessel. Rabba Bar Chana, fourth story, Ikla la'aka de'agma, again another name of a place. Krive le'tzachanta, okay, they brought him this type of fish. Shame lahu gavra davakari le'bate. Now he thought it was a kosher fish, but then he heard someone saying bate. Now bate is a non-kosher fish. So amal midekakari le'bate shmamina davar tamei ipe. When he heard someone say bate, now it didn't sound like they were calling the fish bate, because the fish was tzachanta. But when he heard him say bate, it made him think of non-kosher, and he said, this is a bad sign. Perhaps some people understand that he just took it as a bad sign, bad omen, or maybe he just thought maybe someone mixed that fish inside it. And Amar mitkakari le bate shmamina davar tamei ipe. He said, must be there's non-kosher fish mixed in here. Even though tzachanta is kosher, I bet you there's something mixed in. Lo achamine, and he wouldn't eat it. Litzafra, in the morning, ayemba, he looked at it. I guess it was dark at night, he couldn't see. Eshkach be davar tamei, and he actually saw that there was something non-kosher mixed in. Kari anafshi said about himself, lo yunal tzaddik kol avin. Well, God makes sure that bad things don't happen to tzaddikim. That they won't accidentally sin. He was so happy that he had refrained from eating it. Okay, that was a long tangent about kosher and non-kosher fish. And also some of them about being concerned for fish being mixed in, which is the real reason for what the Mishnah was talking about, because of the Gentiles and mixing in other fish. HaKort shel chilti. Now we get to this case of a quart of chilti. The quart is a slice of chilti. Chilti was a sharp vegetable. My time, well, what's the problem? Why can't you have it from Gentiles? Mishum de mafsakele besakina. Okay, because when you chop the knife, right, there's the flavor from the knife comes off into this slice of vegetable. Even though generally we say even if it gives bad flavor, if the knife hasn't been used in 24 hours, it should be okay. Because of the sharpness of the chilti, and this is a law in general, like with onions, chopping onions with a knife that's, if you have a meat, you have a meat knife and you're cutting an onion, that makes the onion meat, even if the knife hasn't been used in 24 hours, because with something sharp, because the taste, even if it's bad taste in the knife, it'll actually temper the flavor of the sharp item. Therefore, the flavor gets absorbed, and even if it's bad flavor, it actually turns to kind of good because it has a use. Okay, and then it's a problem. Mechalia, some people say it means it actually sweetens it. Some people say it just means really it tempers it. So mechalia le shamnunita, right? The shamnunit, the fat that's in the chorfe of the chilta, right, of the sharpness, basically sweetens the fat, anything that's kind of in the knife, in the flavor of the knife. And then it basically turns something that normally gives bad taste actually into giving a good taste, and therefore it's forbidden to have from a Gentile because they're cutting it with their knives, and their knives must have fat from non-kosher animals in it. Avdei de Rabbi Levi. Now we get to the slave of Rabbi Levi, who was a Gentile, but he worked in Rabbi Levi's house. And Gentiles who work in people's houses as a slave generally keep laws of kashrut and know all the rules. So the Avdei Rabbi Levi Havaka Mezabin Chiltata. He was selling chiltata. Okay, and that was allowed, because even though he was slicing it, he knew the laws, and he was slicing it the way he was supposed to, right, with only kosher knives. Ki nach nafshei de Rabbi Levi. Now, when he died, and the slave of Rabbi Levi kept selling stuff, after coming to Rabbi Yochanan, people say, can we buy from this slave? Because his master died. Amar lehu, avdo shel chaver hareu kechaver. The slave of a chaver is a chaver. He knows the laws. Once he knows the laws, he's going to keep them, even if the master is no longer alive. A similar story, although different. Rav Huna bar Menyume zaven tchelta me'anshe debete to Rav Amram Chasida. Huna bar Menyume bought tchelet from the wife of Rav Amram Chasida. Now, there was always a concern with tchelet that somebody was switching it with what they call kala ilan, which looks a lot like tchelet, but isn't really tchelet. Okay, the tchelet was what they used in their tzitzit. It was came from a special snail, and people would change the dye sometimes and swap it with something that was cheaper. So they went and bought from the wife of Rabbi Amram Chasida, Ata l'kamei Rabbi Yosef. So now he wanted to know, can he buy from there? So, in other words, was it okay that he bought from her? So he comes up for Rav Yosef lo biyadi. He didn't know the answer. Pagabe Hanan chayata. So Hanan, the tailor, bumps into him. Amarle, and he says to Rav Huna bar Menyume, he says to him, Amarle, Yosef anya menale. Why do you think Yosef the poor is going to know this? Now, why do you call Rav Yosef the poor? Unclear. Maybe from the continuation of the story you'll see. But perhaps it was because Rav Yosef maybe was old at that point. If you remember, he forgets a lot of his Torah at the end of his life. Maybe this was later in his life. It's always a good question when we meet these rabbis, at what point in their life we're meeting them in each story. But now we're going to see maybe why he thought, why do you think Rav Yosef's going to have the answer? Because I had a very similar story. I had, and that's why good you bumped into me. And Rav Yosef, why is he going to know the answer? I'll tell you what happened. I had a story where I bought tchelet from the wife of Rabna, Achuad Rabbi Chia bar Abba, the brother of Rabbi Chia bar Abba. But until the Kamed Rav Matna, and I went to Rav Matna, lo avuyadi. He didn't know. Okay, this apparently is something that people just didn't know this law. Maybe that's why he was saying, why do you expect Rav Yosef to know? Until the Kamed Rav Yehuda me'agronia. Then I got to Rav Yehuda me'agronia. Amar li nafat li yadi. You fell right into the perfect person's lap, because Hachi Amar Shmuel, because I heard Shmuel say, Esha chaver harei kechaver. The wife of a chaver, we treat her like she's a chaver. Okay, I think they were worried that women didn't know the halacha so much. And they say, no. Wives of chaverim know all the halachot, and you can rely on them and buy tchelet from them. Okay, moving on. Whether you say the word sanin laha de tanu rabbanan or just tanu rabbanan, the tanu rabbanan, as we see in this following brayta. So Shmuel says this based on a brayta. Esha chaver hareu kechaver, avdosha chaver hareu kechaver. Okay, so what Shmuel is saying can be found in a brayta. Okay, I have to wonder why he's saying this if it was in a brayta, but maybe people didn't know the brayta. Only later they brought it, and they said, here you have it. The woman of a chaver, the wife of a chaver, and the slave of a chaver are treated like the chaver. We assume they know the halachot, and therefore you're trusted to buy from them. Chaver shemet ishto banav u'bnei beito hareim b'ches katan. Okay, if you have a chaver who his wife and his family, they all die. Hareim b'ches katan ad sheyachshedu. Okay, chaver shemet. Sorry, I didn't read that right. It's the opposite. Chaver shemet. Okay, you have a person who keeps halacha, right? But then they die. But ishto ubanav ubnei beito. So his wife, his sons, and anyone in the household, meaning even the Canaanite slaves, are b'ches katan. We assume they continue to keep in his way ad sheyachshedu bo. Okay, ad sheyachshedu, until they do something that arouses suspicion. Other than that, we can trust them. B'chein chatzir shemochrim bat tchelet. Okay, if there's a courtyard where generally they sell tchelet. Okay, hi b'ches katan ad shtipasel. If you know in the beginning that they were selling kosher tchelet, then you can assume they are until you find out a reason that they're not. Tanu Rabbanan, another brayta. Eshet ha'ma'aretz sheniset lechaver. This is an interesting one. First she was married to an Ama'aretz, and now she marries a chaver, so just her status changed. V'chein bito shel Ama'aretz sheniset lechaver, or the daughter of an Ama'aretz who grew up in the house of an Ama'aretz, but then marries a chaver. Again, the Ama'aretz are the people who were suspect, but they're not keeping halacha right. The chavirim are the ones who were in here, right, and they're all part of this. Okay, so v'chein avdo shel Ama'aretz shenimkar lechaver, or a slave who was working for an Ama'aretz now works for a chaver. Kulam tzrechim lekabel divrei chaverut. Okay, that means they have to kind of take upon themselves. They have to make a declaration that they are keeping the laws in their new place. Because Here they made a switch, right? Before we had the chazaka, they were already keeping the laws. Now we have someone who wasn't necessarily keeping the laws. In order to do that, they have to take upon themselves. What if it goes the other direction? The wife of, the daughter of a chaver, who now moves into the house of an am haaretz, or the slave that gets sold to an am haaretz, Rabbi Meir says they don't have to accept any declaration. They remain in their presumptive status of before. Rabbi Yehuda says, of course they do. So we have a machlok of Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Meir. Do they have to accept or not accept upon themselves? There was a case of a woman. Now he's going to support. You'll see which one he supports. She was married to a chaver, and she would tie the tefillin on his hands. Like she was, a whole part of his whole life, his religious life. And you say then she married a tax collector, which were always suspicious people. Nobody liked the tax collectors. And then she was involved in all the tax collecting and helping her husband with that. In other words, the wife just goes after the husband, and therefore that would follow Rabbi Yehuda's opinion that if you moved to a place where there were am haaretz, if they want to be trusted, they would have to take upon themselves a declaration. Otherwise, we would assume they're just going to go along with whatever household they're part of. This shows women is a little bit fickle in those days, or at least there was concern of that, which, again, without living in those days, it's hard to really know whether that was legit, fair or not. Okay, Rabbi Meir obviously doesn't think so. Interestingly, he was married to Bruria, which would maybe make sense in that context. She was a strong woman who knew what she was doing, and maybe that was his experience, and maybe that's why he thought that. Okay, let's keep going. Amarav, chavit asur b'chotem echad. Now we're going to get into a whole list of rules about sealed items. Okay, and according to Rashi, if you look on the next page, asur b'chotem echad, what do we mean? L'shagir b'yad ovei kochavim, dekevan debasar utchelet mehem yikarim, tarach u'mezuyaf lachlifan. And what's the issue? If I send a package with a Gentile, and I send it to be delivered to a Jew, so the question is, how many seals does it need? Okay, is it forbidden with a seal or not? Are we worried that the Gentile is going to open the seal? And it all depends on how expensive the item is. That's how Rashi understands this. And let's just read according to Rashi, and then we'll bring up a very famous position of Rabbeinu Tam. So chavit is a rashi tevot for 4 items, which we'll see in a minute what they are. It's forbidden b'chotem echad. Chotem echad is not enough because we're worried the Gentile will remove the seal and switch the contents. Champag mutar b'chotem echad. Okay, so what are these things? Chavit. Chalav, milk, basar, meat, yayin, wine, tchelet. Okay, those are all expensive things, although we'll get back to the chalav, it's not really so expensive, so we'll see. But because they were expensive, there's concern the Gentile might swap them, take them out, put something cheaper inside. So they're forbidden b'chotem echad because there's a concern that the Gentile will open it. Chilti, murais, pat, bina, mutarim b'chotem echad. So now the champag is chiltid, which we saw before. That's the chiltit that they slice, right? But this is the chiltit without being sliced, which is kosher fish. And morayis, which is also a fish. Chiltit is just a vegetable, right? The concern is maybe, right? So here, if the chiltit is a vegetable, right? I guess there's just a concern that he might take it off and put something non-kosher inside, or morayis, this fish, pot, bread, kavina, and cheese. These are mutarim b'chotem echad because with one, as long as it's sealed with one seal, that's enough. They're not going to switch these things. They're not expensive enough. Pat l'may nichush. So now they're going to say, why is pot not an issue? Because what are you going to worry about? If we're worried they're going to swap it for an old one and take the fresh one and put an older one inside, people will know that it's old. It got swapped for some old one. People know the difference between warm and cold. You know, it's fresh and not fresh. If they're worried they're going to switch it from chitim, wheat, to barley, also people will know. They'll know the difference. And if you're worried that they're going to swap it for the exact same thing, well, people aren't worried that, if they're going to swap it for the exact same thing, exact same quality, well, no one's going to remove the seal to do that. There's no gain for the Gentile, so there's no worry. V'Rav. Now, Rav said this whole statement. So, Maishna Gavina de lo tarach u'mezayif. Right? Gavina is not worth enough for them to swap it. Chalav nami lo tarach u'mezayif. Also, milk is not worth enough. So Amar Rav Kahana, apik chalav va'ayil chatichat dag she'en basiman. Okay, take out the milk and swap it with fish that doesn't have a siman on it. So they say, right, because the fish is more expensive. Well, they say in that case, hainu basar. What's the difference? Meat, fish. Why list them separately as two different items? It's really kind of one and the same. They say trei gavnei basar. Well, there's two types of fish. Okay, two types of meat. One is meat of a fish, and one is meat of meat. Okay, of an animal. Okay, so that's our list of Rav. I'll point out what I said I will say about Rabbeinu Tam, which is Rabbeinu Tam said this isn't talking about Gentiles. The concern here is actually Jews. And he says because in those days, right, some people think that Rabbeinu Tam, in general, he permitted, there was a lot of contact with Gentiles. He permitted a lot of things with Gentiles because the Jews were in good relations with Gentiles. And there was a lot of business going on with Gentiles. And if they required 2 seals for everything, like it was going to be not able to function. So he claims, and it never says anything about Gentiles, by the way, so he understands the sugya, it's not a Gentile, it's a Jew that we're suspicious of. Okay, like already someone who has a reason to be suspect that they're doing bad deeds, right? For him, that wasn't Gentiles. The Gentiles in his day actually got along very well with the Jews. So it's an interesting machloka between Rashi and Tosfot here. Okay, comes Shmuel and he says, Shmuel has his own list. Amal bet asul, bet yud taf. Okay, those are 3 letters. Rashi Tevot we're going to see. Bechotam echad. Okay, those are forbidden with 1 seal. Machag mutar bechotam echad. But machag is permitted. So what are these 3 things? Basal yayin tchelet asurim bechotam echad, because meat, wine, as we saw before, and tchelet. Notice he gets rid of the chalav here, which we had to take that out before anyway, right? They swapped it with the fish, but maybe you just don't need the fish because it's the same thing as the meat. And morais chiltit gvina, okay, here he's missing the bread, mutarim b'chotem echad. Okay, so now, the Shmuel, as I said before, why doesn't he have the dag? Chatichat dag she'em asiman hainu basal. Okay, and tchei gavnei basar lo amrina. You don't need to list 2 types of meat like Rav thought. Okay, so Shmuel didn't need that. Now, what they don't relate to is why did he get rid of the bread? Okay, maybe just it's so obvious, as we saw before, and maybe there was no need to even say that. Tano Rabbanan. Okay, in Syria, you can't even buy from Jews the following things because the Jews there were suspect. Okay, what can't you buy from them? Lo yayin yamach, lo yayin, lo morais, lo chalav, and machag velo melach sal kondarit, velo chiltit, velo gvina. Ela min a mumche. You can only buy it from a mumche. Okay, because even a Jew is suspect that with the chiltit, I guess he was cutting it with the knife, and the wine, it was yain nesech, the morais, okay, all these things had issues that perhaps, right, now the issue here is that the Jews in Syria, now, they were careful about these things in their own house, and that's what we're going to see now, but they didn't care about what we call lifnei iver lo titei mechshol, and they would sometimes get these things from Gentiles and sell them, and that's the concern, because all these things from Gentiles aren't allowed, and therefore we're worried that they're going to sell to us things that came from Gentiles. So they care about themselves in their own house, but they don't care about what they sell in the store. But if you buy it from a mumche will be very careful. You know, if you go to a fish store, they're only going to cut the fish with their knife. They're not going to mix in other types of fish. They're not going to, right? All these concerns are not a concern in a place where people are very careful about things. Bikulam, right, a specialist who has their reputation on the line. But if you go to their house, of course you can eat there because they care about kosher food in their house. They just don't care about selling to anybody who wants to buy it. And this supports what Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi said. If the balabait sends you to your house, you can eat it. Okay? Because when they send you a gift, they're taking it not from their store, they're taking it from their house. Right? My time, balabayit lo shavakatera va'achalisura. We assume the balabayit has the option to take the kosher and the non-kosher. They're not going to choose the non-kosher if they can eat the kosher. And then when they're sending it to you, we're assuming they're sending it from their house. Right? That's what we're going to read next. They're taking it from what they themselves would eat. And that's when they send you a gift. It's only in their store they seem to not care. And this is particularly in Syria. The Jews were suspect of this. Umelach sal kondalit. Now we're back to the Mishnah with things that you can't eat from a Gentile, but you can get benefit from them. My melech sal kondarit, what is this? And what's the issue with it? Amar Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel, melech shekol sal konderei Romi ochlim otam. It's the salt that all the bakers of Rome eat. Tanu Rabbanan. Okay, now we're going to see what the issue is. So Braita says, Melech sal kondarit, shchora, asura, levana muteret. Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir said the black one is forbidden, the white one is permitted. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, the opposite. Levana, asura, shchora, muteret. We're going to see in a minute that they don't actually have a debate about the halacha. It's just each one was talking about the way they did things in their city. Okay? So he says the white ones are forbidden and the black ones are permitted. Rabbi Yehuda ben Gamliel, Mishum Rabbi Chanani ben Gamliel Omer, zo v'zo asura. The black ones and the white salt is forbidden. So Amar Rabba bar Rav Chanan, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, now he's going to explain each of these opinions. L'divrei ha'omer levana asura, the one who says white is forbidden, that's Rabbi Yehuda, because kirbei dagim levanim tmeim me'uravim ba, because they have the innards of, the way they would do this salt is, they would have salt and they would make clumps out of it. And how would they make the clumps? They would mix the innards of the fish, and non-kosher fish specifically, in the white ones. Okay, when you said, the one who said the black ones are forbidden is because in his town, they would mix the black salt with the innards of non-kosher fish. And the Divrei Omer, you don't even need to say this, it's obvious. Both of the black and the white in the place where Rabbi Gamliel was, Rabbi Yehuda ben Gamliel were mixing the innards of non-kosher fish. All just depends on what was going on in that town. Amar Rabbi Abahu Mishum Rabbi Chanina ben Gamliel Zaken echad haya b'shchunatenu she'ha machalik panea b'shuman chazil. Some people would spread pork, the fat from the pig, on the salt. Harei elu asurim. Okay, now we're just finishing up this Mishnah. The last line in the Mishnah was redundant because the beginning of the Mishnah said, Elu dvarim shel avdei kochavim asurim ve'ein isuran isur na'ah. They're not forbidden to benefit from. Then it went through our whole long Mishnah. And then at the end of the Mishnah, it says the same thing. Elu asurim ve'ein isuran isur na'ah. So why are they adding the same thing? So they say, L'me'ute mai, l'chizkiya l'me'ute biyadua, l'Rabbi Yochanan l'me'ute morayas u'gvinat beit unaiki, stama k'Rabbi Meir. Okay, so depends whether you're Chizkiah or Rabbi Yochanan. According to Chizkiah, it's to say, if it's Yadua, if you know they mix something in it, this is stam food from Gentiles. But if you know that they poured some wine on it or something else, then obviously, he's saying you're not allowed to eat it. So this is saying these are forbidden, but you can benefit from them, but not if you know they put wine in it or something like that. And the Rabbi Yochanan, it's to exclude the Marias and the Gvinad Beit Unaiki. And he basically paskins like Rabbi Meir, and as he says that the Stam Mishnah is going like Rabbi Meir, who said that the Marias and the Beit, there was a machloket on Daf Kaftet in the Mishnah between Rabbi Meir and the rabbis about that issue, and he's coming to say, this line is coming to say that the Mishnah was like Rabbi Meir in that machloket. So there's two ways to understand either Chizkiah or Rabbi Yochanan. Okay. Now, right, if you remember, by the way, that Rabbi Yochanan didn't hold by this chizkiah about the yadua. If you knew they put wine, I forget now what he said in that machloket. Okay. Mishnah. Ve'elu mutarim ba'achila. Okay, so now the Mishnah says these are the things that are forbidden to eat. Chalav shechavo ovdei kochavim v'Yisrael ro'eu. Sorry, these are the things that are permitted, right? You can eat all these things from Gentiles. Here we get to milk. Okay? Milk if Yisrael ro'eu. If the Jew sees, because otherwise it's a concern, the Gentile might put in non-kosher milk, right? Milk from a non-kosher animal. Now, this is right. Nowadays, you can buy it in the store because you know that there's what we call pikuach, right? There's oversight, and they're not going to mix in a different milk when they advertise it as cow's milk. It's cow's milk, okay? And that's a whole question. What if you go to a place where they're not so careful about that, okay? And how do you know? It's also the whole pasteurized thing. I'm not going to get into that right now. V'hadvash. Okay, also honey. V'aduv devaniyot, if you have these clusters of grapes. Ava pisha minatvim, even though there's liquid coming out of them, like a little, the juice comes out of it. Ein b'hem mishum hechsher mashkeh. That liquid is not significant. Meaning, and as you might think, well, maybe they poured some wine on it, but no, because it's coming from inside the grape, and the liquid that comes from inside the grape is not significant enough that if, for example, it wouldn't be susceptible to impurity, we don't call that a liquid God upon it because you're not interested in that liquid to be there. Therefore, it's kind of insignificant and we don't worry that, maybe, it's like wine of a Gentile. Right? If you have pickled items that don't generally have wine or vinegar in them, like you just put water and salt, for example. V'tarit she'ena trufa, right? We have all the flip cases from the previous. If you have fish that's not chopped up small, v'tzir sheyesh badaga, in the fish brine that has fish in it, ve'aleh shel chilti, and the chilti we said was chopped, but not the leaves. The leaves of the chilti here, we talked before about a quart of chilti, a slice of it. This is just a leaf of it, so you don't have to worry about it being cut and the flavor going in. V'zeitei glus ka'ot hamagulgalim, and these are softened olives that they would press into a cake, perhaps, something like that. Rabbi Yossi Omer hashlachin, which are, these are overripe olives, asurin, are forbidden. Hachagavim habe'im min aslula asurin. Okay, so Rabbi Yossi adds that shlachin, these kind of olives that are overripe, they're actually forbidden. And the chagavim habe'im min aslula asurim, min aheftek mutarim v'chein l'truma. Okay, so now we say that the grasshoppers that come from the slula, okay, what's the slula and what's the hempeg? Rashi says, hanim karim basal, okay, that's slula from the basket, before the chemvani. Okay, these are forbidden because the chemvani pours some wine over them. Okay, whereas the ones that are min ha'heftek, which is where they gather, when the grasshoppers are sold in the store, they pour some wine. But if they're not yet in the store, before that stage, they don't generally put wine on it. So you could buy it from there. Okay? V'chein l'truma. And truma is the same thing. Okay? Truma, we're going to understand what that means in the Gemara. Rashi already tells us, okay, we don't understand what this means right now. Tanina lahaditanu Rabbanan. Now, this Mishnah can also be found in the following Braita. Yoshev Yisrael b'tzad edro shel avdei kochavim. V'ovei kochavim cholev lo, u'mevi lo ve'eno choshesh. Okay, so now we have this Braita that says the Jew can be sitting on the side of where the animals of the Gentile are, and the Ovei Kochavim is milking and can bring him the milk, and you don't have to worry about it. So now they say, well, Hechidami, what exactly is the case? If there's no other non-kosher animals in his flock, then of course you could do that. Well, if there is non-kosher animals there, then shouldn't we have to worry? In other words, the Jew is just sitting on the side. They're not watching everything the Gentile's doing. So they say, fine, let's explain the case. There are animals that are non-kosher. If the Jew were to stand up, the Jew could see. Okay, and then, but while the Jew is sitting there, the Jew can't see. Now, you might have thought that since the Jew can't see while they're sitting, maybe you have to worry the Gentile might take milk from the non-kosher animal and mix it in. Therefore, comes to teach you, while the Jew is sitting there, even though he can't see everything the Gentile's doing, the Gentile's scared about the Jew. In other words, he knows the Jew could look at any moment and get up and look, and therefore the Gentile is going to be careful not to mix in. So these are all ways of how we can trust people if we're in the vicinity, even if we're not exactly watching. It sounds like hashgachas, right? And on restaurants. Like they're not there all the time, but you know they could walk in at any minute, so people are careful. Okay, hadvash, honey. So now why is honey allowed? Well, what are we worried about? If you're worried about mixing wine in it, then maybe they mixed wine, Mr. Sareh. It will ruin the honey. Remember also in those days, we learned about Bava Kama, honey was more expensive than wine. But then maybe you would mix it in because it's cheaper, but no, you wouldn't do that because it would ruin the honey. You wouldn't want to ruin good honey. It's worth a lot of money. If it's because they cook it, and then it would be cooking, but you could eat it raw, so no bishul akum. If maybe they cooked it in their pots, well, anyway, their pots, right, once they're not used for a day, it's not a problem. They give out bad flavor, and that's permitted. Okay, and that's why you can have their honey. Haduv devaniot, afapi shemitanfot ein b'hem mishum hechsher mashke. Urimini. Now this contradicts the following source. Habotzer lagat. Okay, when you take you're collecting from the gat, and then you're going to trample on the grapes and make wine out of them. Shamay omer huchshal. He says because there's liquid that gets on them once they're collected, and some juice comes out, that actually makes them susceptible to impurity. Hillel omer lo huchshar. Hillel says no, but odele Hillel Shammai. But then Hillel changed their mind and agree with Shammai. Now, why is that the liquid going to make it susceptible to impurity? And here we said it doesn't. So the answer, the two cases are different. Now, in order for something to make something susceptible to impurity, it has to be you wanted the liquid to be there. Now let's think about it. When you're in the gat, the wine press and you're going to, trample on those grapes, you want the juice to come out. So therefore, hatam kabai le'lamashke, you wanted the liquid. Hacha lo kabai le'lamashke, but here you wanted the grapes. You didn't want the liquid, and therefore the liquid that comes out does not create a susceptibility to impurity, and therefore also we said it's not forbidden from a Gentile because you're not worried that there's wine on there or something. People generally don't want liquids on there. V'tarit she'eno trufa, tanu rabanan, a braita, ezu itarut she'ena trufa, kol sherosh v'shidra nikar, as long as you can identify the head and the spinal cord. Ve'ezu tzil sheyesh badaga, kol shekilbit achat u'shtei kulbiyot shotetot bo. What does it mean you have fish? The brine that has fish, you can eat it. It's when there's two fish, one or two fish. Next question, the Gemara is, why do you have to say one or two? How about just say one? One is enough, then two is obviously fine. We'll get back to that tomorrow. But as long as there's one kilbit fish on the top or two, it's fine. Okay, so what did we do today? We went through the previous Mishnah and the comparable cases in our Mishnah about the things that you can't eat from Gentiles, things that you can eat. From there, we got off on a whole tangent of kosher fish and non-kosher fish. We talked about laws of kashrut, about notein tam lifgam, and sharp items, and how with sharp items it's different. Even if it gives bad flavor, still it's going to be a problem because it kind of, takes in the bad flavor and turns it to good or uses it for its purpose. We talked about the trustworthiness of the Eved and the wife of people who are chavirim. We talked about what if they move from one to another, from an Amaretz to a chaver, or from a chaver to an Amaretz, and how do we treat that? Do we trust them or not? Then we talked about the seals, and do the seals help if you're sending something with a Gentile perhaps, or maybe with a Jew who's not trustworthy? Do you have to worry that they're going to switch it, and do you have to put more than one seal on, depending on what item it is and how expensive it is, and whether there's a concern they're going to switch? Then we got through, some of the, we said Rav and Shmuel had different opinions about which items need a seal, which items don't, although there was a lot of overlap. We talked about what this melach sal kondranit is. Then we got to the list of the things that are permitted and why they're permitted. And with that, we finished for today. Wishing everyone a good day.